This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration. This is Remote Daily, an oasis of innovation for your mind, your soul, and your heart. Connect, act, and recharge with Remote Daily. This is Daily.
The rain edition. Thank you so much, Ian D. And welcome back to the stage, Dr. Cheryl Holder. Such an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Dr. Holder, you're here with Sky, Sarah, Monin, Sabine, Rashad, Pamela, Lance, Karis, Kate, Jolie, Eleanor, Dave, and Sammy, and so many others who are joining us on LinkedIn right now. What would you like to know from us? Maybe you have a question to this global community that's from America, from Europe, across various time zones. What is something that you would like to know from us? I'm going to put you on the spot here. Maybe you have a question in mind that you would like to be answered from our community.
Well, when I got into the climate world, it was what my patients were telling me. And they weren't able to connect the dots, and they saw their health issues declining during the heat, and they saw their rashes, and they were making all complaints, and they couldn't pay their bills. And that's when I started helping to connect the dots. So I always ask people, how do you think climate has impacted your health? And have them think about it, because health, not just simply being what happens to maybe your body, you got some sort of rash or something, but even think about your mental health. Think about the last time you went out to play, you went out to walk, you went out to take your kids somewhere. Look beyond health in the physical definition of health, but in health and where we say where you live, where you work, where you play, all the community around you. So how has climate affected you?
Wow, what a powerful question. How do you think climate has impacted your health? And I see some of you already typing here in the chat. Very curious to see your answers. And well, I can only say, speaking from Germany, we have had tremendous floods this year for the very first time in a way that most people have never seen before in their lifetime. And even though I live in New York and I live in the US most of the time, this was the first time that family and friends were massively impacted in their livelihoods and of course in their health, endangered, and was the first time for many, I think, in the most privileged part of Central Europe to realize what is going on and what our future can be. But there's so much more. And thank you, Dr. Holder, for bringing this up. The chat answers are coming in. Karis is actually saying, where's the real healthy food? That's how I always think climate is impacting me. The food sources, right? It is so hard to get to some place where you know that what you're putting in your body is actually really healthy. And Sarah said, well, I feel like I can't even begin to know because there's so many things that we accept as part of life without realizing that these problems are created by a specific structure of our society. So where does the impact of climate actually end and where does it begin? Thank you, Sarah, for bringing this up. And Rashad says, I think that the impact that a lot of people around the world will see is just going to be about the most basic thing, water. And it is already happening in many places. We see it between India and Pakistan, for instance. And this is not off topic at all, I think, Rashad, and it's a very good point, I think, maybe also to talk about with Dr. Holder. And climate and health have definitely impacted my wallet, says Sarah, and it will probably be our biggest impact on our finances in the future because many of us will have to relocate. Many of us will have to seek more costly healthcare. And Anne says, I always had some spring allergies, but I've had allergies from spring, but through to end of summer. The heat and the pollution. And yes, food has become so expensive. So I feel it in various parts of my life. already. And Sabine says, well, on an individual level, I feel bad because I'm somehow happy I no longer have to travel in order to experience much friendlier temperatures because it's warmer where I live now. But on a community level, we have water crises and droughts in Central Europe caused by both climate change and the interference of large companies. Pamela says, family in San Francisco died over the summer while hiking. So sorry to hear that, Pamela. Condolences to you. Found to have died from heat exposure with temperatures rising 30 degrees from morning to afternoon. Trees that were normally there shielding the trail burned in a recent fire. This will become a common story. And of course, this is taking us into not your family. Oh, great. Thank you, Pamela, for clarifying. But this is taking us into a whole other story that, of course, everybody who has family on the West Coast or has followed the stories from there, that this country, the USA, is feeling climate change in a way that most people probably also wouldn't have realized just a couple of years ago. So thank you for sharing here. This is such an interesting learning for me always to hear your answers from the community. I learned so much from all of you. And I will close with Sarah saying, who just wrote a story in the Washington Post about a Latino community in Chicago rising up because the scrap metal center was relocated from a wealthier area to a poorer area. And as New Yorkers, we know the Bronx has some of the heaviest health impact on people, some of the heaviest asthma cases in the United States because of the trash and other things and other facilities being built there where poor people live. So thank you for sharing. Many, many things here to think about. Dr. Holder, when you read the chat, what stands out to you? What is something that you would like to elaborate on here?
Everything that I've heard in the chat have at some point in the last few years, I've been hearing from my patients, the extent of the allergy seasons, the heat, living near offending agents. In Florida, we've had the highways, the dumps, all the things that we know that's selective for poorer communities. So when I do this, I say now, if as a physician, because they want to know why are doctors doing this? Now, as a physician, I came into this to try and make you healthier. So when you hear how the health has been impacted, we have to get to the core, to the root cause, which is not simply to say, I'm going to give you some creams, I'm going to give you some asthma medicine, I'm going to see how we can find access to better food and you can go to this store. But we have to look at that is the what we call the environmental injury, because if you don't address the environmental injury, we are not getting to the root of then the gases and the elements that are warming the planet. So we have to do both. So that's what takes us into the role of the physician and the clinicians. And I read about that family in Northern California at Washington State. I think they moved from San Francisco out to this area and they're avid hikers. But can you imagine if their physician had understood what they do for fun and understood how heat works and understood that acclimatization is important and also how rapidly heat can take you. They went out with an 85-gallon pack, but they just should not have gone out. So this is where, as clinicians, if we're not aware of how do we prepare our communities, and not just the clinician's role, but the entire society's role, that the climate has changed. All these things are happening now. And where my vulnerable population has been screaming this for years, I've used this to say, let's use their message to warn all of us. And then if we can find solutions that get to the people who are closest to it, we'll get a more rapid change in getting to zero and not getting that warming to the danger level where there's no return. But if we had valued populations like what I care for and valued them enough that we're going to protect their health and value enough to say they're screaming, the planet has changed, the warming is now, we're all being hurt. Not just me and my poor community, but we're all being hurt. I think that family who went hiking would have had better instructions, would have known, no, you can't go hiking. I don't care how much water you have, just don't do it. And but things are not being done.
But that sounds to me almost like I would expect from my general practitioner, if I have one, if I have a trusty source that is a physician, even near to me, which is a luxury already, that would mean that I would kind of like expect for this person to become very knowledgeable about weather and climate and sort of my personal climate counselor almost. So I imagine a huge educational step that is necessary for your profession.
Absolutely.
How do
That's
you
what
do
we're
that?
pushing for, that the education is not just limited to clinicians though. The clinicians play a role, but it does take the whole concept of public health, and that the warnings that need to go out. Do you remember, after, you guys are still young, 9/11, we had all this red, yellow, orange, and all this kind of color things. There's a way to respond to the terrorists. At this point, we can as a society find ways to educate. So the responsibility is not simply on clinicians, but the clinicians have a huge role that we can play to get the word out, prepare our communities, and to get the activism that's needed. Because if everyone recognizes here, just on this group, everybody knew that their health was being impacted. It wasn't just polar bears, it wasn't just the poor people, but everyone already. So then when you go to your doctors, you alert your clinicians that, yeah, something is happening. What are you doing? How are we going to safeguard our communities? And then we can take that to voting and so many other steps. But it's a huge task, but we don't have a choice.
When you go to your fellow practitioners, to the physicians, when you approach them with this topic, do they still shrug you off? Do they say, no, that's not our job? Or is there something like a movement in the medical community that's building?
There's a movement building, and we teach at my school, and we talk about the social determinants of health. Because if you look at the data, your health is really determined by where you live, where you work, those aspects, your policies, your money, that's what drives your health. So as physicians and clinicians, if we're here to improve your health, we have to start tackling that. And that is being taught in more and more schools, and more as clinicians are being employed, the systems that they work in have to address this, or else they're not going to be reimbursed. And also, you got to be real. Everybody got to figure out where the money is, and it's impacting clinicians. When you have that storm that took down your community, you're a physician, we take care of people. If they've all migrated, or your electricity doesn't work and the flood took out all your systems, you're not going to work. If you don't see patients, you don't bill, you don't get paid. So there's personal interest economically, and then there's the greater interest in why we all became doctors, which is to improve the health, or clinicians. And so I see the awakening, but it's slow. But when I tell them about when they experience one storm or some extreme weather and their practices shut down, I see them much more saying, okay, something has to be done, because how are we going to take care of our patients in this way? So it's slowly happening, not fast enough, but I see the momentum picking up in more and more doctors, especially the younger physicians. They are really jumping on this.
Very interesting. And Rashad just made a point here in the chat. It is, of course, not only about educating the physicians, it is about educating a lot of people, including the Forest National Park Rangers that Rashad just mentioned. They also have to be trained and educated so that when they see someone who's stepping into a dangerous situation and they see that the climate for that day can be life-threatening, that they step in and stop people from exposing themselves. But what a complex topic to talk about. And you, Dr. Holder, you have been on this for a long time. So just to understand, you moved to the US in 1986, I believe, in 1968, I believe.
68, yeah.
Central Park, Bob Marley, we won't forget. You landed yourself in Brooklyn, where your own experience of the lack of medical infrastructure made you see that there is a need for doctors, made you wish to become one. And then you turned this into a reality. And years later, we're treating patients when then the HIV epidemic rolled into the city and of course into the country. And what, like you have seen all this, you have been there, you have been helping, you've been on the front line for so long. When was the first time as a doctor that you realize there's something else going on here? There is a pattern of illnesses that I see that are actually related to climate. When did you start to see that? What put you on that path that you're on today?
HIV kind of prepared me to keep my eyes a little bit wider open onto the social ills, because HIV was just so devastating to so many people, every race, but again, Black and brown people, poor people. But by about 5-6 years ago, when the complaints, the little things started coming in about the heat and especially the economic cost of trying to stay cool, trying to keep up with the allergies, that was prohibitive for a lot of our poorer people, especially on fixed income. And that's when it came together more for me. But if I had not gone through the HIV epidemic and seen what happened, but also seeing our response, because the Ryan White Act provided the social safety net. It addressed the transportation. The Ryan White in the beginning addressed even childcare, it addressed the mental health issues, and it gave access to medication and care. And that saved so many of my patients. And that's what I realized. And the work that we did, I mean, this emergency use authorization that we use for coronavirus, I remember when we were fighting in the 80s to make sure that the government moved rapidly on the research for those drugs for HIV. So every time people tell me about, oh, coronavirus vaccine is new, I said, new doesn't have to be bad. I remember when we fought for new, we fought for those drugs to get through fast because I had people dying and we needed some medication to keep them alive. And when you saw these drugs come in and 6 months later, my patient had gained 20 pounds, there was nothing bad about new. That was the way we had to get our government to work to save lives. And so with that, I understood that we have to use a similar system with climate change, because when you see the amount of asthma that my patients were having, the amount of COPD, the heat problems, the bills, it's impossible that we don't act. And the systems that we developed under the Ryan White and around HIV can absolutely work to get folks mobilized to do something, because we took HIV in 30 years to this disease now where you don't have to get it. And we can get it to the point where even if you get it, you're going to live a natural 70, 80 years. Our goal now is to not to get it, to get it eradicated, and that's going to happen. So it made me a much more aware and the need to act as early as possible. It took a while to sound the alarm around HIV, because you remember, if you guys aren't around, but back then we thought it was the hemophiliacs, and they said it was the Haitians, and they said it was homosexuals, without looking at the bottom line, how this virus works, and understanding the physiology and the science behind it, and using public health measures. Same thing with coronavirus, and the same approach we can use with climate change, but we have to get people educated and get people activated, where you as the individual say, it's impacting me now, what am I going to do? And not forget that before it gets to the air, to get to the richer people's lives, it has always damaged the health of all the frontline communities, all the fence line communities, and they have paid a huge price for us being able to have all the luxuries of this modern world. And we have a responsibility to find a solution that helps them first, because if it helps them, we get our solutions that will help us.
And just to understand, Dr. Holder, because you talked about these illnesses that you saw early, what is something that will be a lot more common in terms of illnesses because of climate change in, let's say, in 3 to 5 years than it is today? What are the illnesses that we should look out for?
Well, the illnesses you're now experiencing just gets exacerbated, just like coronavirus exacerbated everything. That's what you're going to see. So the people with lung disease is going to be worsened. If you have cardiovascular disease, you have a higher risk of having heart attacks, strokes, especially around heat. Anything that heat and pollution impacts, it's going to be worse. The allergy season, because the CO2 content is so much higher, the trees go faster and the periods of growth is longer. So you're getting that allergy season starting earlier and extending so long. Nobody thought their children or adults would be on allergy medicines for half the year. That's just not acceptable. So we're seeing these changes. And so vector-borne diseases, which we call, like when you get the malaria, the chikungunya, the Zika, because the climate warms, this is going to be the biggest problem for adults and for everyone, is that when you go outside and these mosquitoes are there day and night, they're bringing the parasites and the infections with them. And so infections that we didn't expect to happen when you live in New York or living in North Carolina, you're going to start seeing. Like we had Zika epidemic, which never came as far this north that we did in the past. Chikungunya is coming. The West Nile is spreading. Across the world, the US, you're going to see more and more, what we say tropical diseases, but it's basically diseases that live at a certain temperature. And as their carriers gets warmer, you're going to see it. Food costs is going to go up because there's less and less healthy, good growing areas. This fall, they're predicting more drought conditions and warmer temperatures in the south, really cold in the north, because that's part of the planetary changes. So all of this, get ready. How do we prevent it? It's very difficult to, at this point, the way the warming is already set. So how do you prepare your pocketbooks for this? How do you prepare when you go out? This is where, as clinicians, we say, yes, as the temperature warms, you're going to have to be aware of mosquitoes. You're going to have to try and get screens on your windows and your doors. And you're going to have to really, when you see certain changes, expand the differential. It's maybe that rash is Lyme's disease. Maybe it's not just a simple rash. Maybe that fever is West Nile and not just a regular fever of a regular cold virus or something. So it's, there are just so many ways. And I think mental health is just the biggest thing that we tend not to put up top. But if you go through these storms and these extreme weather events year after year, we say it weathers you. It does weather you. It gets you a little bit tired, a little down. And I think of the children too, the impact on the children. We forget children are closest to the ground, so they get more of the pollution, more of the allergies. I go on and on, it's just amazing. When you think a child breathes 40,000 times in a day, can you imagine how much pollution goes into that child? So it's just amazing when you think of what could happen and what is happening. But the good thing is we have time and we can make those changes and we can prepare for it. Because if we all come together and get the government, get our politicians to act, we don't have to end up with the worst outcome for as many people as possible.
And I was going to ask you about ground zero for climate change, as you called your own neighborhood or your own city in the beginning of today's show. We have had comments here in the chat from Rashad saying, we already see energy grids collapsing, and Florida saw that. Sarah wrote in the chat, there's still this huge kind of like doubt around climate change as a whole, but also because like warming is such a nice word, and it has been established as part of climate change. Climate change itself doesn't really sound really that bad. And when you walk out in the street, in your everyday, it's for many people, it's still not as prevalent. So there is a lot of things happening at the same time that are somewhat affecting us, but they seem much larger than us. You said that in where you live in Miami, people are already moving because of climate to higher altitudes, and even to neighborhoods that are considered poor, like Little Haiti in Miami, just to escape the heat. And of course, we see the same on the West Coast, where people start moving east because of the fires. But in your own neighborhood, when you look at the grid, when you look at the doubts that are there in people's minds, and when you look at what's changing, what do you think people are going to do to adjust? What do you think we will see in how mobility, how housing, how city patterns are going to change? Just in the more recent future, what do you see already happening in the ground zero of climate change as you call your home?
Well, again, the vulnerable population, when you don't have the resources, you kind of just go with what you have to do. The rich folks and the developers are always ahead of the game. They've already bought out much of the land in the higher ground, which used to be the poor communities, and that's along with redlining and Jim Crow regulations. So, and because in Florida, the railroad tracks had the best ground, and that's where they used to put the poor people by the railroad tracks. It just happens to be the highest ground now. So the rich developers understand this, and so they've already bought out the land. And when you don't have the resources to buy where you live and you're renting, when your landlord says your lease is not renewed or they find ways to kick you out, you got to move. So yes, my population that I care for is moving, not because they realize it's climate change, they just got to move. The rich folks definitely understand this, and the developers, and they bought out these very nice land that no longer, that doesn't flood. What I see for most populations, the migration will happen. Again, they may not pull it together, but they will have to move because of so many reasons. We have a huge tax bill coming, a huge bill coming because the water comes up through the limestone on the bottom, and all the septic tanks are going to be at risk, over 100,000 septic tanks. And many of these are in older communities of working class folks. So at some point, they won't be able to afford that, and they will end up having to move. Now, what this mass migration will mean to the rest of the states, that's what our politicians and the people have to deal with. But on the day-to-day basis, people are adapting. People are learning when to go outside. People are changing their basic habits. People are doing what people do, which is accommodate. Now, our politicians are reluctant to make the real changes, and we're developing a thing, what we call greenwashing, where they sort of make some changes, elevate some roadways, say they're going to put some things to block the sea level rise. So they're making some adaptation efforts, but at the same time, they make decisions that we know is going to hurt the planet in the long run. But it's, I encourage my patients, I educate them, and I encourage them to make their reasonable decisions. So when their young people are moving, I said, I understand, maybe you'll move with them when it's time. And you may get the best price for your house and go with them, because some of these issues are very, very structural. But you can slowly make these changes. I'm in a red state with a government that is entrenched in beliefs that does not work towards the overall planetary health. But as an individual and with our population, I can prepare them as best, and hopefully they will be able to work together to push to get these changes that we need. We don't give up, because I'm like, I'm an immigrant. We left one country and came to another. So at some point, America's huge. You will be able to find it and speak as a voice in the right areas. So you may have to give up on Florida if it doesn't work for you, but do what we can.
That's quite a strong phrase to take away from today. You have to give up Florida, maybe at some point, if it's not for you, if you can't bear it anymore. And we're not talking about politics, we're talking about the everyday weather, the everyday going out and being outside, but if it becomes impossible. So I'm trying to, always when I hear about it and I read about this topic, and it was just a report that came out by the Biden administration, I'm just going to put in the chat here, warning of a national security challenge related to the climate crisis. Everything you say is scary. Everything that report says is scary. And I always feel like this is way too big for me. I have no chance to take this on. However, you said something a few minutes ago. You said, now it's, for many things, it's already too late, but we can work on so that it doesn't get worse come 15, 20, 25 years. So what in your personal life do you do to not contribute to carbon emissions, to maybe make your own handprint, as we say, as the opposite of footprint, like make things better, other than your own work? Do you do anything in your household? Do you have any recommendations for all of us that we could that we could walk
Well,
away from today?
the beautiful thing is every climate solution is a health solution. So if you give up red meat, even for 1 or 2 days, telling you your cholesterol is going to be better, your inflammatory state is better, there's so many advantages to giving up red meat besides the planet. So I say, try and get rid of some of that red meat in your diet. If you can walk, that improves your physical health, improves your cardiovascular health, improves your pulmonary health. Do it in a place that's not polluted so you can get benefits. So if you're in your building, why are you taking the elevators to the 2nd or 3rd floor? Why can't we do more and build in? Why do you have to drive everywhere? There's so many things we can do that are just simple things. Did you change out all your light bulbs if you're rich enough? There are many, many small steps, especially your purchasing power. Why are you buying stuff you don't need? Every time you pick up to buy something, think about it. So there are little steps. And then how do you vote? If you're not thinking of the next generation and not thinking of the obligation we have for humanity and right down to the trees and the birds and the insects, then how do you vote for folks who want to continue the coal production and continue not accepting that we have to eliminate fossil fuel? These are some of the things you're going to have to grapple with yourself and have to sort of come to Jesus or come to Muhammad or come to whoever moment. And like, what is our role here as our purpose of being humans? And how can we develop that connectedness where we feel the understanding and feel the compassion and knowing that if I do it for this person, I'm doing it for me. And so it's not just all about me, but it's really understanding that we have to work together for this planet. There's a certain amount of time where, yes, the rich folks will do well. That's been written and we know it, but what about some of the other folks? And at some point, I used the thing with the wolves, and you may not realize how important wolves were till we lost them from the forest. And so when you lose a certain group of people, so what, they're poor and they're from wherever, when you lose that group of people, you wonder, you don't see the importance till maybe later. And until wolves are reintroduced and the environment got healthier when the wolves came back, you realize wolves were incredibly important. We have to look at the world that we're all in it. And when you're not here just to save poor people, but in recognizing what they're going through with their health issues and with the climate and finding the solutions, it works together to the benefit of all of us. And that will make our planet richer, and we'll be able to get through the warming that we've already experienced and to stop it and give us time to recover and adapt.
So when you eat, when you move, when you consume, when you shop, when you vote, and even when you care for others, these are all things that you can do and that you can change in your own behavior in order to make the earth a little bit easier to live on for the next generation. Maybe this also answers Anne's question in the chat. I guess it's really on us to do all that. And it is on us to say thank you to Dr. Holder. So if you want to switch to gallery view right now and switch on your camera, if you feel comfortable doing so. Dr. Holder, this is for you. This is our virtual glitter coming from all around the world to you. Thank you so very much for being part of Remote Daily today. And I only have one last thing to ask you. We always ask in the end of the hour for one final saying, maybe a personal mantra of yours or something that you would like to announce, or a final message for this community before we leave you here after taking an hour of time for us, which is a huge privilege. Thank you so very much for taking this out of your day. What would you like to leave us with today, Dr. Holder?
Do the work, get educated more. COP26 is coming on. The Climate Reality Project is on. There's so many ways to get educated on climate. And as you work towards improving the climate, remember, as you look the equity solutions and equitable solutions, there's some people who will need more to be able to get through it. But in giving more, it really benefits all of us. So join the fight. Thank you.
And do the work. And I want to thank you, Dr. Holder. This is for you.